Hi guys, it's Frank again. Going to do another Bible study. I plan to just do these once a week like we did when we were in the class, but a lot of people had asked could we do them more, and I figured I'll just do them when I have some spare time, and right now I have some spare time. It's Friday night. What is it, the 27th or something? I took another vacation day today, just kind of piddled around here with the wife, and was going to go fishing, but she painted her toenails, and apparently you can't go fishing after you paint your toenails. So I don't know. Anyway, so I've got some spare time now. I thought I'd set up here in the kitchen. It's been a beautiful day. It's about 10 till 7 in the evening. Let's get going. Let's start. This is probably my favorite story in the Bible. It's at least my favorite story about Jesus. And I think that this story encapsulates everything that he is to everyone. And just kind of, it's a story that'll move you. So I'm going to just read the whole thing first. I think with a story like this, we just read the whole thing, and then we'll kind of break it down and see what God has here for us. And it is John chapter 9. We're going to read through the whole chapter. John chapter 9. We're going to read John chapter 9. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the work of the God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." Having said that, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed, and he came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes open?" they demanded. He replied, "The man they call Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. The Pharisees investigate the healing. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been born blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was the Sabbath. Therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. "He put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man cannot be from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others asked, "How can a sinner do such miraculous signs?" So they were divided. Finally they turned again to the blind man. "What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened." The man replied, "He is a prophet." The Jews still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that he can now see?" "We know he's our son," his parents answered, "and we know he was born blind, but how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for already the Jews had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Christ would be put out of the synagogue. That was why his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." A second time they summoned the man who had been blind. "Give glory to God," they said. "We know this man is a sinner." He replied, "Whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see." Then they asked him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered, "I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Then they hurled insults at him and said, You are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as far as this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. The man answered, Now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he listens to the godly man who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. To this they replied, You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, Do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir? The man asked. Tell me so I may believe in him. Jesus said, You have now seen him. In fact, this is the one speaking to you. Then the man said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. Jesus said, For judgment I have come to this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, What, are we blind too? Jesus said, If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. It's a pretty powerful story. Let's just break it down here. So Jesus and the disciples are walking along. They see this man born blind. Now, the blind had no way to provide for themselves in this day and age. Of course, with modern technology and today, there are plenty of blind people that are fully functional and some get quite wealthy, musicians and business people and teachers and writers. But at this time, all you could do is beg. It didn't matter how smart you were. So he's sitting there begging. The disciples ask a weird question. They say, Jesus, who sinned, this man or his parents? Say he's born blind. Well, you can't sin before you're born, so that's kind of a weird question. The belief of the day was if something really bad was happening to you, many people believe that you deserved it. For instance, if the parents were ungodly people, this was kind of their punishment for being that way. Their son is born blind. A lot of times, if a woman couldn't get pregnant or something, people just felt like, well, they must not be very godly. People would judge people very harshly. And it was generally the righteous people, right? The leaders of the Jewish people that judged this way. Of course, we know that it was false, and John the Baptist's parents were very old before they had him, and you look at Abraham and his wife, and when they had Isaac was very late in age. So completely false belief. Unfortunately, there are people today that believe, bad things happen because you're doing wrong, and that's not always the case, obviously. So, anyway, that's one of the reasons Jesus said, don't judge others. So Jesus says neither of them sinned. The reason this guy is blind is so the power of God can be displayed in his life right now. This guy was born blind so that right now Jesus can do this miracle. So Jesus spits on the ground and takes the spit and the dirt and makes mud and puts it over this man's eyes, kind of packs it on his eyes. And then tells this man, sends this guy, a blind guy, to this pool in the city to wash his eyes out. And you think, well, what's up with that, right? First of all, there's a couple things going on. Remember, this is the Sabbath. God told people to keep the Sabbath. It was a day of rest. It was a day to in a restful state, worshiping God, relaxing, preparing for the week ahead, right? But the Pharisees, the Jewish leaders, had taken this to the umpteenth level, and they made a law for everything. You couldn't carry your a chair. You couldn't walk a certain distance. You couldn't move a mat you were sitting on. I mean, it went on and on and on and on. And they would basically hold people accountable and punish people for breaking these man-made laws on the Sabbath. So, as crazy as it sounds, one of these ridiculous laws was you weren't allowed to spit on the Sabbath. And the reason for this was you might inadvertently water a seed, which would be considered work. That's how ridiculous it got. So here's Jesus. It's the Sabbath. He spits on the ground. He makes this mud. He puts it in this guy's eyes. Now, Jesus could have said, receive your sight, right? He didn't need to do anything. I think he just, to me, and this is just Frank's thoughts, he wants this guy to kind of participate in his own healing. It's not going to be easy for a blind person to go anywhere. This guy has to make an effort, right, to get to this place. But when you're blind, you know, especially when you live in the same town and you walk the same roads, you know where stuff is. This is a grown man who's been blind his whole life. He's very adept at moving through the city, getting to where he needs to go. So he does it. Jesus tells him to do it. He goes, he does it. He wipes the mud off and he can see. People start recognizing this guy, and they're like, isn't that Bob? He's the guy, the blind guy, right? Jim and Linda's kids, Bob. But he looks different. And they're like, no, he looks like him, but it's him. Well, it looks different because he's usually sitting probably in a stupor, you know, just sitting there, hoping somebody will put some money in his cup just so he can help his parents pay for food and whatever else. So now he's walking, he's alert, he's looking. For the first time, he's seeing stuff. It's got to be amazing. I mean, you see these, now that I've been on Facebook for a little while, you see these video clips where, you know, a baby hears for the first time, or a kid, you know, they put something in their ear and they hear for the first time, or some kid that's been colorblind his whole life, they put these glasses on, he can see color, and it brings tears to their eyes. I mean, they're amazed. It's a wonderful thing. Imagine this guy, he's never seen a tree, a house, a person, nothing. So he's walking around, he's amazed. He's going to look different. Plus, people don't normally notice a beggar. You know, you get used to somebody just sitting there all day long, and you kind of walk by, right? So this guy speaks up. I am he. I'm the one. I'm the man. So they ask him, how were your eyes opened? He replied, the man they called Jesus made some mud, put it on my eyes, sent me to wash. I did it. Well, obviously, the people are like, what? Where is this guy? Where's Jesus? And they said they don't know. He doesn't know. So, like they would do with anything, they brought it to the spiritual leaders. And the Pharisees weren't just spiritual leaders. They were the leaders. They were kind of the government for the Jews. Now, the Jews at the time, you know, were under Roman occupation, so that was the higher government. But the Jews still, Israel still had their Pharisees as leaders. So, you know, you're gonna bring it to your leader and your spiritual leader. You know, something like this happened, you'd say, let's go ask the preacher. What's going on? Let's ask the priest. Let's ask whoever your spiritual leader is. They should know, right? especially when the Pharisees are claiming that they're the ones that have the ear of God. They're the ones that can talk directly to God, and they're the ones that pray and make sacrifices so that people's sins are forgiven. Right? They're the ones that have they're the spiritual guys, or at least they're supposed to be, and they claim to be. So they bring him to the Pharisees. The Pharisees ask what happened. The guy tells them. Right away, some of the Pharisees, this is how ridiculous they are. Oh, this can't be from God. It did it on the Sabbath. You know, and Jesus runs into this time and time again throughout the New Testament, where he does something on the Sabbath and they bring charges against him. You know, that's like Jesus says, is it against the law to do good on the Sabbath? You know, on the Lord's Day? You're telling me it's against the law to do good on the Lord's Day? So once again, they say it can't be from God. He did this on the Sabbath. Well, other Pharisees that have a little bit more common sense and aren't so blinded by their own evil, really, are saying, wait a minute. This guy did a pretty major miracle. This is unheard of. I think we need to look into this. So now they're divided, right? So they turn to the blind man again. What have you got to say about this guy? The guy says, all I know, maybe he's a prophet. You know, this guy's thinking he must be from God. He's not a sinner. So the Jews still didn't believe. So now it's easy for them to say, we don't believe you're even born blind. Even though the community brought the man to them and said, this guy has been blind his whole life. He's a grown man. We've known him. You know, he's lived right here in our town since he was born, a baby, a toddler, and we know the guy. But they just dismiss it, say they don't believe it. And so they send for the guy's parents. And the parents are like, yes, this is our son. Yes, he was born blind. How he received his sight, we don't know. Ask him. He's of age. He can answer for himself. You don't need us. And it says that they said this because they feared the Jews. Now, when it says they feared the Jews, they were Jews. They were all Jews. They feared the Pharisees. They feared the religious leaders of the day. And the reason that they feared them, it says, is because the Jews had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Christ would be put out of the synagogue, meaning that Jesus was the Redeemer, that Jesus was the Messiah, the Christ, the Anointed One. If somebody decided that that was true, the Jews were going to put him out of the synagogue. And you think, okay, so they put him out of the synagogue, big deal. But it's not that way. It's not like the First Baptist Church kicks you out, so you just run down to the United Methodist Church, and they kick you out, so you just run down here to the local Church of Christ or the Catholic Church. It wasn't that way. There was one synagogue, and you say, well, okay, I just won't go to church. I won't go to synagogue. I'll sit home and watch football. Well, it didn't work that way. The synagogue, the whole thing is, it was kind of like, I don't know that much about the Catholic faith, but there's excommunication. It's kind of like that, but I think of the Amish. The Amish, when they shun a person for whatever reason, I mean, you don't do business with them, you don't talk to them, you don't look at them, right? So if they were going to be put out of the synagogue, what it meant is, not only do you not get the blessing of the priest, not only do you not get, your sacrifices made and sins forgiven and all that stuff, but to do business, to be able to buy things from people. People weren't going to sell you things. If you had a business, you weren't going to be able to sell things. You weren't going to be able to go to the market. It was a pretty major thing. It was devastating. So people did whatever they could do to not be put out of the synagogue. So that's why it makes a little more sense that they're fearful of it. So they're kind of like, hey, ask him. He's a grown man. A second time, verse 24, they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God, they said. We know this man is a sinner. He replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know is I was blind, but now I see. Then they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered, I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? So, I think to appreciate this guy's boldness, you have to understand this guy has been kind of a worm his whole life. He's been, obviously people thought he was a sinner or his parents were sinners. I mean, he's a low kind of thing. Like, for whatever reason, this guy had received a bad judgment from God, and now he's got all this unfortune and misfortune. It's also like he would have no confidence. You know, he doesn't have confidence. And a blind person, he probably knows everything about everybody in town because they probably just talk around him and say things thinking he's just sitting there and not listening. Well, the blind hear very well. So this guy is really standing up. He's bold. He's giving it to him, man. I mean, he's being a real rebel, kind of a smart aleck to him. You want to hear it again? You want to be his disciples too? You didn't do that. This is like coming up against the government and the mob at the same time. These guys, remember, these guys are the ones that had Christ killed. These guys weren't guys to mess around with. They hurled insults at him and said, you are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. You know, we're this much better than you. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. So this guy spins it. They're saying they don't know where. The guy says, now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly man who does his will. Not that he ever heard of anybody opening the eyes of a man born blind. So basically what he's saying is, so you guys are the religious leaders. You guys are the ones that are in tune with God. You guys are the high spiritual people, and you don't know where the man comes from? Maybe you got some problems. Maybe you're not as close with God as you think you are, is basically what he's saying. Because they're not recognizing a miracle from God when it's right in their presence. Now remember, it's not that they don't believe this guy was born blind. They believe it. They went and got his parents. The community is saying, this guy is born blind. Now, of course, if they were good leaders and they cared anything about the poor or the misfortunate, then they would have probably known this guy. They'd probably prayed over him before. They'd have probably helped him out a time or two, but they didn't. They didn't recognize him. But now they believe that he was born blind. They're not even disputing that. All they're saying is they're disputing that Jesus is the Christ because he did this on the Sabbath. That's how corrupt their hearts had become. That's how blind they had become. Verse 34. To this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. Here we go, back to the whole judging people. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. They threw him out. They didn't just physically throw him out of where they were. It's indicating that they put him out of the synagogue. This guy's name is Mud. No pun intended with the eyes. But, so that's kind of a big deal. This guy, I don't think this guy cares. This guy's been blind his whole life. Now he can see. He's probably like, who cares? Throw me out of the synagogue, bunch of fools. Now this next part's really interesting because I'm trying to think, I can't remember another time where Jesus, like, goes back and finds somebody, right? But in verse 35 it says, Jesus heard that they had thrown him out. And when he found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? So when he found him, so that means that Jesus found out that this guy has now been put out of the synagogue for the giant sin of being healed by Jesus on the Sabbath day. He hears about it, and I don't know, he's thinking, I want to go talk to the man. So Jesus actually goes and finds him. That's very unusual. So he finds him. Sorry, where am I? He says, do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir? The man asked. Tell me so I may believe. This guy's saying, buddy, I'll believe anything you tell me at this point. Because unlike the Pharisees, I recognize a miracle when I see one. I recognize the blessing of God when I see one. Jesus said, you've now seen him. In fact, he's the one speaking with you. Then the man said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. He worshipped him. I don't know what that looked like. I don't know if he got down on his knees and clung to him, or he just hugged him, or just, I'm sure he was a crying mess. I mean, think how thankful you'd be. And Jesus makes an interesting statement, and he makes this statement knowing that there are Pharisees within earshot of him. He says, for judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind. He's speaking figuratively, right? The Pharisees claim to see. They claim to not be blind. They claim to be the experts, the holy ones, the righteous, the best. And Jesus is like, no, you're not. You are blind. So some of the Pharisees hear him say, and they say, what are we blind to? He says, if you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. Meaning, they're not admitting to their guilt. You can't, it's kind of like the old alcoholics theme, until you admit you have a problem, you're never going to get help. And you can do that with anything. And what he's saying is because they will not admit that they're sinners, admit that they've got a problem, admit that they're not doing the will of God, admit that they're a bunch of posers, they're fake, they're phonies, they're not spiritual men. If they would admit that, if they would repent, if they would change their ways and really start ministering to the people and ministering to God and doing God's work, they would recognize God's Son when they see him. They would look at all the prophecies that Jesus fulfilled and recognize them, but they're blind. They're turning a blind eye to this. They're saying, nope, I don't believe it. I don't see it. And that's their danger. That's why they're in such danger, Unless you're willing to admit you got a problem, your chances of fixing the problem are pretty slim. That's all I got. Like I said, I'll do these whenever I have a chance. I might do one Sunday morning. I hope you're getting something out of it, and let's go ahead and pray. Father, I just thank you for your word. I thank you that we're not down here just muddling through on our own. I thank you that we have hope in your Son Christ. I thank you that there's times of trouble. You get this virus. You get people are scared. People are shut in their house. But there's some good coming out of this, God. There's some people that are picking up their Bibles and spending a little time, and they're they're researching some things and they're looking toward you, and this could, you know, I know that you'll use this for the good. But Lord, we do ask protection on all our people, friends and family, and everybody watching this today. God, I just ask that you would move this virus through the land quickly and get it out of here, and let's get back to getting outside and being together, and not being fearful just to go out and get something to eat and get some gas in our cars. And Lord, we just ask all these things in the name of your Son Jesus. Amen.